Have you ever felt invisible? So invisible that the person sleeping next to you, the person who's supposed to be your safe harbor, could steal your dreams and throw you out onto the street like a bag of trash? I know that feeling. I felt it in my bones on the cold pavement, with my children's eyes locked on me, filled with a confusion that shattered my soul. My name is Elisa. I was 38 years old, and my life was about to be destroyed by a slip of paper that was supposed to be our salvation. This story is insane. If you, like me, believe that the universe has a funny way of settling scores, and that karma, even if it's late, never fails, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss how this ends. Let's rewind a bit. Before any prize money, before lawyers and courtrooms, my life was a silent marathon of survival. For 5 years, the scent that defined me was hospital disinfectant. I was a cleaner. My days began in the dead of night, when the city was still asleep and the stars were my only companions. Double shifts weren't an option, they were a necessity. The money I earned, every single cent won through the ache in my back and the strength in my arms, was barely enough to keep the lights on and food on the table. We lived in a neighborhood that had seen better days, a place where the cracks in the sidewalk mirrored the cracks in its residents' dreams. There was me, my husband Ricardo, and our 2 treasures, Leo, at 11 years old with eyes that already understood too much, and little Sophia at 7, still holding on to the sweet innocence of childhood. Ricardo! Oh, Ricardo! He had been unemployed for almost a year. What started as a frustrated job hunt had slowly morphed into a bitter state of complacency. His days were a monotonous symphony of the television's drone, the smell of stale cigarette smoke embedded in the couch, and heavy sighs, always blaming the government, the economy, the world, for his misfortune. Responsibility, to him, was always someone else's problem. The man I married, the one full of plans and smiles, had vanished. In his place stood a shadow, a domestic tyrant. Arguments became the soundtrack to our home. They weren't conversations anymore, they were explosions. Shouts that made the walls feel like they were closing in, doors slamming with a violence that made me flinch, and threats, veiled, low-voiced threats that were worse than any scream. "You'd be nothing without me," he'd say. "Who would want a woman like you, tired, washed up?" His abuse didn't leave bruises on my skin, but it shattered my soul. It was financial abuse, subtle and cruel. My entire paycheck went into a joint account that only he controlled. I had to ask for money to buy bread, for the kids' school supplies. He made me feel small, worthless. The job that paid our bills was, in his words, a menial gig. My opinions were silly woman's talk. He isolated me, made me believe I was invisible, that my only purpose was to serve and obey. And I, out of fear, out of exhaustion, for the sake of the children, I stopped sharing. My dreams, my joys, my fears, everything was locked away deep inside me. Our marriage had become a silent prison, and I was the inmate who cleaned her own cell. Until one day, the routine was broken. It was a Tuesday. I remember the sky was a heavy, gray color, as if it sensed the coming storm. After a 12-hour shift, with a pain in my lower back that made me walk hunched over, I passed a small lottery kiosk. A blinking yellow light in the street's darkness. I'm not a gambler, never have been. I believe in hard work, not luck. But that day, something called to me. I looked in my wallet. I had $10 left. $10 that were supposed to last until the end of the week. But the exhaustion was so deep, the despair so profound, that I felt an impulse, a need to do something, anything that could change our fate. With trembling hands, I bought a ticket, a single ticket. As the man behind the counter printed it, I felt a chill. It was foolish, insane, but it was my insanity. I took the small slip of paper and, using the pen I always carried in my uniform pocket, I did something that would change everything. On the back, in small, neat letters, I wrote my full name, Elisa Medeiros, and that day's date. Why? I can't explain it. Maybe it was an act of ownership, a way of telling the universe, this tiny piece of hope is mine. I got home to the usual scene. Ricardo on the couch, the TV blaring some game show, his feet propped up on the coffee table. The air thick with smoke and indifference. I put the ticket in my nightstand drawer, the only space in that house that still felt like mine. "I bought a lottery ticket," I said, void of emotion. Just in case. He just grunted a reply, his eyes glued to the screen. To him, it was just more of my silly nonsense. To me, it was a seed of hope planted in the most barren soil imaginable. A seed that was about to sprout in a way I could never have predicted. The next few days were the same old haze. Work, home, Ricardo's heavy silence. I had even forgotten about the ticket, buried under the weight of daily worries. The drawing was on a Saturday night. We were having dinner, the kids and I eating rice and eggs, Ricardo picking at a plate I had hastily made for him. The kitchen radio was on, playing some pop songs softly in the background. And then the host interrupted the music. And now for the winning numbers for the massive rollover jackpot. My heart didn't skip a beat. I felt nothing. It was just background noise. But Ricardo, for the first time in months, seemed to pay attention. He got up, walked to the radio, and turned up the volume. The host began to call out the numbers, one by one. With each number, I saw a spark of recognition in Ricardo's eyes. He ran to our bedroom, rummaged through my nightstand drawer, and came back with a small slip of paper in his hand. His face went through a transformation I will never forget. From chronic boredom to disbelief, from disbelief to a wild, almost manic euphoria. His eyes gleamed with a greed that scared me. "We won, Elisa. We won," he screamed, a shout that seemed to tear his throat. 10 million! $10 million. I froze. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. 10 million? It was such a large, abstract number it didn't make sense. I looked at Leo and Sophia, who were staring at their father, frightened by his outburst. A timid joy began to bubble up inside me. It was over. The suffering was over. The double shifts, the late bills, the humiliation of having to ask for money, it was all going to end. The ticket. Ricardo, the ticket is mine. I whispered, more to myself than to him. And that's when the mask fell. Ricardo's face twisted. The euphoria gave way to an icy rage. He looked at me as if I were an insect. "Yours," he spat the word. "What do you mean, yours? Who do you think you are? You won't see a single cent of this money." The air grew thin. Time seemed to stop. "What are you talking about, Ricardo? I bought the ticket, with my money. My name is on it." He laughed. A short, dry, cruel laugh. "You useless freeloader. You live in my house, under my roof, eating my food. Everything that's yours is mine. And you deserve nothing." Every word was a stab wound. In front of our children, Leo flinched, and Sophia started to cry softly. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Ricardo, no." "Shut up!" He advanced on me, his face red with rage. "Your little princess life here is over. Get out! Get out of my house! Now!" What happened next was a blur of humiliation and violence. He stormed into our bedroom and started ripping my clothes out of the closet, throwing them on the floor. He grabbed my few belongings, a picture frame with my parents' photo, the books I loved, the hand cream I used to soothe my work chapped skin, and threw them all into a trash bag. I was paralyzed, in shock, unable to react. He grabbed me by the arm, with a strength I never knew he had, and dragged me through the house. "Dad, don't do it!" Leo shouted, trying to get between us. Ricardo shoved him aside without a second glance. He opened the front door and threw the trash bag onto the sidewalk. "Take your junk and disappear. And don't ever come back." He pushed me outside, into the cold night. I fell to my knees on the rough concrete, the pain in my body nothing compared to the agony tearing through my chest. The door slammed shut with a final boom, sealing my fate. I was left there, on the sidewalk, under the dim light of a street lamp, with a trash bag containing the wreckage of my life. The neighbors, drawn by the yelling, peeked through their windows, their curtains moving like curious, frightened eyes. And worst of all, through the living room window, I could see the small faces of my children pressed against the glass, crying silently for a mother who had just been cast out into nothingness. In that moment, I wasn't Elisa anymore. I was the invisible woman who had become disposable. And the man inside, my husband, was celebrating his new life as a millionaire, a life built on my destruction. The first night was a blur of tears and cold. With nowhere to go, I swallowed my pride and knocked on my mother's door. She took me in, yes, but with a look of disapproval that hurt more than the cold. "I always knew that man was no good," she'd say. But you have to be patient, my child. That's marriage. To her, I should have endured it, kept quiet. The humiliation of being thrown out was, in her eyes, my failure. I stayed there for a few days, sleeping on a mattress on the living room floor, feeling like a burden, listening to her lectures on submission, and feeling the absence of my children like a phantom limb. Ricardo's face twisted. The euphoria gave way to an icy rage. He looked at me as if I were an insect. Yours, he spat the word. What do you mean, yours? Who do you think you are? You won't see a single cent of this money. The air grew thin. Time seemed to stop. What are you talking about, Ricardo? I bought the ticket, with my money. My name is on it. He laughed. A short, dry, cruel laugh. You useless freeloader. You live in my house, under my roof, eating my food. Everything that's yours is mine. And you deserve nothing. Every word was a stab wound. In front of our children. Leo flinched, and Sophia started to cry softly. I felt the blood drain from my face. Ricardo, no! Shut up! He advanced on me, his face red with rage. Your little princess life here is over. Get out! Get out of my house. Now! What happened next was a blur of humiliation and violence. He stormed into our bedroom and started ripping my clothes out of the closet, throwing them on the floor. He grabbed my few belongings, a picture frame with my parents' photo, the books I loved, the hand cream I used to soothe my work-chapped skin, and threw them all into a trash bag. I was paralyzed, in shock, unable to react. He grabbed me by the arm, with a strength I never knew he had, and dragged me through the house. Dad, don't do it! Leo shouted, trying to get between us. Ricardo shoved him aside without a second glance. He opened the front door and threw the trash bag onto the sidewalk. Take your junk and disappear. And don't ever come back. He pushed me outside, into the cold night. I fell to my knees on the rough concrete, the pain in my body nothing compared to the agony tearing through my chest. The door slammed shut with a final boom, sealing my fate. I was left there, on the sidewalk, under the dim light of a street lamp, with a trash bag containing the wreckage of my life. The neighbors, drawn by the yelling, peeked through their windows, their curtains moving like curious, frightened eyes. And worst of all, through the living room window, I could see the small faces of my children, pressed against the glass, crying silently for a mother who had just been cast out into nothingness. In that moment, I wasn't Elisa anymore. I was the invisible woman who had become disposable. And the man inside, my husband, was celebrating his new life as a millionaire, a life built on my destruction. The first night was a blur of tears and cold. With nowhere to go, I swallowed my pride and knocked on my mother's door. She took me in, yes, but with a look of disapproval that hurt more than the cold. I always knew that man was no good, she'd say. But you have to be patient, my child. That's marriage. To her, I should have endured it, kept quiet. The humiliation of being thrown out was, in her eyes, my failure. I stayed there for a few days, sleeping on a mattress on the living room floor, feeling like a burden, listening to her lectures on submission, and feeling the absence of my children like a phantom limb. While I was at rock bottom, Ricardo was living his dream. Social media became the stage for his tacky spectacle. Photos at champagne-fueled parties, selfies in a red sports car he barely knew how to drive, fake gold chains glittering on his chest. He was the town's newest millionaire, and he made sure everyone knew it. And by his side, like a leech, was his brother Marcos, a man with an easy smile and calculating eyes, who became Ricardo's financial advisor. I'd see the pictures and taste the bitter poison in my mouth. That was my money, the money that should have been getting my kids a better life, being burned on frivolities and whims. The shame and pain were paralyzing. I could have given up, accepted that cruel fate. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Leo and Sophia's faces, and their image gave me a strength I didn't know I had. I couldn't give up, not for me, but for them. It was then that a former coworker told me about a place called the Welcome House, a shelter for women victims of violence. Walking through those doors was the hardest and most important thing I've ever done. That's where I met Clara, an older woman with graying hair and a look that seemed to see right through my layers of pain. She was the shelter's director, and she listened to me, truly listened. For the first time in years, someone listened without judgment, without blame. I told her everything, between sobs, feeling pathetic. When I finished, I expected pity. Instead, I received fire. Pathetic, Clara said, her voice as solid as a rock. Elisa, you are a survivor. What that man did to you isn't just a betrayal, it's a crime. Financial abuse is abuse. He stole from you, humiliated you, and took your children from you. The question isn't what you're going to do. The question is, when do we start fighting back? Her words were like a sunbeam in a dark cellar. Fight back. The words echoed in my mind. And the detail I had mentioned, almost as a footnote, about writing my name on the back of the ticket, made Clara's eyes light up. That's it, she said. That's our weapon. He may have the ticket, but you have the proof of ownership. Elisa, we are going to get back what is rightfully yours. Clara connected me with a lawyer from the support center, a young, fierce woman named Ms. Amanda. Together, we started to map out our plan. The first step was a formal legal notice, a document informing Ricardo that the ticket was mine and that he had to return the winnings. His response came as a laugh over the phone from his new, expensive lawyer. She can't prove a thing. The ticket is in my client's possession. The case is closed. They didn't know about my signature. While the legal battle began behind the scenes, my story somehow reached the ears of a local journalist producing a documentary about social justice. She sought me out. The idea of exposing my pain to the world was terrifying. But Clara reminded me, your story can give a voice to thousands of women who are suffering in silence. And so I agreed. The cameras became my confidants. I told them everything, from the beginning of the abuse to the night I was thrown out. The story of a lottery ticket became the story of a fight for dignity. The documentary aired and caused an uproar. Public opinion, which had once seen Ricardo as a lucky eccentric, began to see him for what he was, a thief and abuser. The pressure mounted. The corner store where I bought the ticket confirmed, through security footage, the day and time of my purchase. A handwriting expert analyzed the signature on the back of the ticket and confirmed it was mine. The walls were closing in. Finally, the day of the preliminary hearing arrived. I walked into the courthouse, my legs feeling like jelly. Across the room, there he was, Ricardo, wearing an expensive suit that looked uncomfortable on him, an expression of arrogance and contempt on his face. Beside him, his brother Marcos, whispering in his ear. When my eyes met his, he smiled. A cruel smile that said, "You will never beat me." But I was no longer the same Elisa he had thrown out of the house. I was a woman who had found her voice. When I was called to the stand, I walked up with a calmness that surprised even me. Ms. Amanda asked the questions, and I answered. But then, I looked directly at the judge and asked for permission to speak freely. And I spoke. Your Honor, 4 years I lived beside a man who made me believe I was worthless, that my job was insignificant, that my decisions were foolish, that my only purpose was to serve him. He didn't have to hit me to break me. He broke me with words, with silence, with contempt. When I bought that ticket, it wasn't out of greed. It was an act of desperation, an attempt to give my children a better life, a life where they wouldn't have to watch their mother count pennies to buy milk. That slip of paper became the perfect excuse for him to destroy me completely. Your Honor, I am not here today for the money. That money has been corrupted by his greed. I am here for justice. I am here to get my children back. I am here to say out loud that financial abuse is abuse, and it leaves scars just as deep as any physical blow. A heavy silence filled the courtroom. I could see the judge's expression change. The arrogance on Ricardo's face faltered for an instant. But the masterstroke was yet to come. The prosecution called its next witness. A tall, blonde woman, dressed flashily, entered the room. I didn't recognize her. Ricardo, however, turned pale. It was Vanessa, one of the many lovers from his new millionaire life. His lawyer objected, but it was too late. Her testimony was devastating. I didn't know he had kids, Vanessa said, her voice steady. He told me he'd been divorced for years. His attitude changed when the money started running out. He got aggressive, paranoid. One night, we argued, and he shoved me against the wall. He left me with this bruise. She showed a purple mark on her arm. He said if I ever opened my mouth, he would destroy me. And then, the final blow. I have proof, she continued, handing her phone to the prosecutor. Text messages, voicemails, recordings of him mocking his ex-wife, calling her useless, bragging about how he tricked her and how the kids were a burden he was finally free of. The sound of one of the recordings was played in the courtroom. Ricardo's voice, unmistakable, dripping with scorn and cruelty, echoed through the room. His face fell apart. The mask of arrogance shattered on the floor, revealing the small, pathetic man he had always been. He looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see hatred in his eyes. I saw fear, pure panic. He glanced at his brother, Marcos, looking for help, but Marcos was already inching away, like a rat abandoning a sinking ship. The judge slammed the gavel. The ruling from the preliminary hearing was overwhelming. He granted me temporary custody of Leo and Sophia, and most importantly, he ordered an immediate freeze on all of Ricardo's accounts and assets pending the final trial. The house of cards he had built had begun to crumble. As I left the courthouse, I ran to hug my children, who were waiting for me with my mother. In that embrace, I felt the real prize. The rest was just a consequence. The final trial was almost a formality. The evidence was irrefutable. Ricardo, abandoned by his brother who had fled the country with what was left of the money and with no funds to pay for expensive lawyers, was a pathetic figure on the defendant's stand. The verdict was read out loud and clear. Guilty. Guilty of misappropriation. Guilty of fraudulent conduct. Guilty of financial and emotional abuse. The sentence was severe. A multi-million-dollar fine, the seizure of all assets purchased with the prize money, and what was the biggest victory for me, a restraining order preventing him from coming near me or my children for a minimum of 5 years. He walked out of the courthouse like a ghost, stripped of everything, the money, the arrogance, the family. A man who had everything and, through his own malice, was left with nothing. My new life began the next day. With the money that was recovered, the first thing I did wasn't to buy a big house or a luxury car. It was to rent a small, cozy house with a garden where the kids could play. A safe place, a home. And then I fulfilled a dream. I used a significant portion of the funds to establish Open Doors, a foundation and support center for women victims of abuse, just like the place that had saved me. Clara became my partner and mentor. My story, which began with tears and humiliation, became a beacon of hope. I wrote a book, What We Silence for Love, which became a bestseller. I was invited to speak at forums, at conferences, to share my journey not as a victim, but as proof that it's possible to rise up from nothing. Today, when I look back, I no longer feel anger toward Ricardo. I feel a kind of empty pity. He took everything from me, but in doing so, he gave me the chance to discover who I really was. He forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. I discovered that true wealth isn't in a bank balance, but in peace of mind. It's in tucking my children in safely at night. It's in using my pain to ease the pain of other women. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to truly find yourself. Justice may not erase the scars, but it can most certainly light the way to a new beginning. A beginning where the invisible woman finally learned to see herself. What would you have done in my place? Would you have fought back, or would you have tried to forget and move on? Let me know what you think in the comments. I read all of them. And if stories of triumph and justice like mine inspire you, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another one.